All right.
Professor Likens, it's great to have you here today talking to us as part of this AIDS meeting. I wanted to start by asking you about your background. You work in a field that's not something that every child would know about, stream ecology and carbon balances. How did you get interested in this?
I grew up on a small farm in the Midwest, and from as long ago as I can remember, I was interested in things outdoors, biology of all kinds of critters around, and I think that clearly got me started in an interest in doing biology in the outdoors. I'm a field biologist, and I'm interested in how the great complexity of ecosystems works, what makes it function, and how those functions are critical to the organisms that live within an ecosystem and to us as humans.
What was your training?
I was trained as a biologist. My PhD is in zoology, actually, in limnology. Studied lakes and streams. I worked on lakes and streams for much of the early part of my career, and then have broadened out to a more even larger, more complex challenge, and that is trying to understand whole landscapes, whole watersheds, and how those watersheds can be used to understand that complexity of the natural ecosystem.
Hubbard Brook is one of the most ambitious and important projects in American ecology, I believe. How did that project start?
Well, Hubbard Brook was something that we started in 1963, and we started it with a very simple idea. The idea you have all this complexity out there. It's an enormously complex system, and how can you simplify it in order to try to understand it better? And so the simple idea was, can we use the chemistry of stream water draining a watershed ecosystem in much of the same way that a physician would use the chemistry of blood or urine to diagnose the health of a patient? We wanted to know if we could diagnose the health of a forest watershed in the same kind of way. And so we started with that very simple analogy. It worked. It gave us very quickly insights about how the system as a whole was functioning, and then we could delve very quickly into the system and look at specific functions and try to understand them better, and therefore the whole system better. So I'm really enamored with the idea of looking at large, complex systems, and Hubbard Brook is a wonderful example.
Of course, your claim to fame is having identified acid rain and acidification in the northeast of the United States. The first reports of that from North America. How did that come about?
Well, the story of acid rain is very interesting to me. It's not an unusual story in that from the very first samples of rain and snow that we collected as a part of our Hubbard Brook whole ecosystem study, we knew that the rain and snow was very acid, but we didn't know if it was unusual or not. And so from about 1962 until about 1969, we were collecting rain and snow chemistry and saying, oh, isn't this interesting? I wonder what this means. And it wasn't until I changed jobs and moved from being a professor at Dartmouth College to a professor at Cornell and set up a series of collecting stations around the Finger Lakes in central New York that we discovered this was a more regional problem, and that was our first clue that this really was something unusual, something different. And so we published the first paper on acid rain in 1972, almost 10 years after those first samples were collected. A lot happened in the meantime to help us understand what was going on, but there was that long delay before we could understand whether this was really unusual or not and what significance it might have ecologically. That, throw in a plug, is one of the really good examples of the value of long-term data. If you collect samples for even a few years, even 5 years, you sometimes get a misleading idea of what really is going on. And so a longer time frame is very helpful, and it certainly was in the acid rain issue.
Your field depends a lot upon instrumentation and new ways of measuring. That means that it's a very technologically driven field. What have been the major stepping points over the last 100 years as you helped to develop this field?
Well, there have been a number of new tools that have helped to open, if you will, that black box of the ecosystem, the way we first started to think about ecosystems. And those tools have been of many kinds. They've been tools of doing things, such as being able to experiment with whole systems. That was very powerful in terms of opening up the black box and trying to understand what was going on inside. But also tools like radioactive isotopes, stable isotopes, modeling, large data sets. A number of those tools were enormously important, have been, still are, will be enormously useful in opening up that complexity of the ecosystem black box.
What are the trends for the future?
Well, in order to make really major advances in the future, we're going to have to unravel that complexity. I've been talking about complexity. And rather than avoiding it or ignoring it, the real secret, in my opinion, is to try to develop ways of simplifying that complexity so that it can be studied, so that it can be understood. But the complexity of large systems, and particularly with humans involved in those large systems, is an enormous challenge for the future. There are many others. I think one of the things that concerns me a great deal is that as we go to these larger and larger multidisciplinary efforts, and the National Science Foundation has now started several efforts along that line, we need teams, multidisciplinary teams of people to do that work. And we've given relatively little thought as ecologists to how to structure those teams, how to train the team members so that we can truly develop an interdisciplinary team rather than a multidisciplinary team. An interdisciplinary team is one that works on the boundaries of all the disciplines that are involved rather than just having each person do their own thing. So I think that's a huge challenge for the future. I think it's quite solvable, but we haven't given that enough effort.
In your current title and position, you guide a large team. You're still experimenting in the Hubbard Brook area, or where are you working now?
Yeah, the Institute of Ecosystem Studies that I direct is a group of scientists that not only are very bright, but they enjoy working together. And they have developed several large team-oriented projects, ranging from efforts towards savannization of the Negev Desert in Israel to large studies of the Hudson River ecosystem to a major new effort which we lead as part of the Baltimore ecosystem study, a study of the whole Baltimore area as an ecosystem. And these are large team efforts. They involve the scientists working together, sharing information, and the old saying, we try to make the whole more than the sum of its parts.
What are you finding out about our environment now?
Well, things are changing dramatically. Ecosystems are being buffeted from all kinds of insults that we humans throw at them. And they clearly are efforts that we will have to deal with in the future. So as we as professional ecologists gain more knowledge and better understanding, then we can apply that understanding toward solutions, helping to guide solutions for managers, decision makers, and others. But the problems are very large, including the one that gets probably the most headlines these days is global climate change, but loss of species, invasion of exotic species, or now it's referred to alien species, land use changes, toxification or pollution of the biosphere. These are still major, major problems. And they're occurring at such large scales that it requires a large-scale effort and a multidisciplinary team effort in order to make understanding. We have to also add, which we've not done very well in the past, social scientists, economists, historians, people into this equation if we're going to make real progress, in my opinion.
Can you get this message out to people?
We try to get the message out to people at every opportunity. I guess that's why I'm speaking to you. But it's difficult. It's difficult because there are other factors in that equation. There are economic considerations, there are political considerations, all of which I would argue are tied intimately into an analysis of an ecosystem and how it functions and how it changes. But people have different perceptions of what they think are important. And some of that may be a lack of understanding of what truly is important from a biological point of view, or from a sustainability point of view, that is to protect an environment and protect a way of life into the future. So those are tough challenges of what I would just call general ecological literacy that we have to meet and we have to succeed with.
What does science have to do to meet these challenges in the future?
Well, we as scientists, I think, we try to develop new knowledge. We try to develop a better understanding. That's only one part of the equation, but it's an important part of the equation in terms of making intelligent decisions. And so I think it's very important for scientists to be able to make that information known to the public and to policymakers. I'm fond of a phrase that we use at the Institute of Ecosystem Studies, and that is that we not only collect data, but we want to be able to translate it and transmit it to the public. I mean, only a part of our job is done if we just collect the data. We have to make it available and understandable to decision makers and to the public.
Do you see a greater integration of sciences in the future?
Well, from my point of view, if we're going to use multidisciplinary teams and strive toward this interdisciplinary understanding that I think is very important, then the only way that that's going to happen, it seems to me, is if we are able to bring those disciplines, those people who are doing those disciplinary kind of efforts together in an integrated way. But even more important is the integrated results, the integrated management that we would like to achieve. Do you like the truck in the background?
Yeah, I had to read just to say we have to do that one. I couldn't hide that one.
I'm going to need to go.
What's acid rain and acidification
That was
like?
one of my better ones.
Yes, it was.
Did you lose
It
it?
only caught the end.
What's acidification and acid rain like now in your region?
Well, one of the really interesting components of acid rain is that after we passed the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments, I think the public and the politicians just kind of took a giant sigh of relief. Phew, that problem is finished. It's not finished at all. We still have acid rain. It's a major continuing environmental problem. It has continued to acidify lakes and streams. It has leached important nutrients out of forest soils, and on and on and on. So we have a way to go, and this is an important and complicated problem because since we collectively made that sigh of relief, it's going to be very hard now to turn the public back into saying, oh, what, we have to do more? Well, we do. From a science perspective, we know we have to do more, but I think it's going to be a very difficult task to convince the public that, well, why didn't we do it in the first place? I can't give an answer to that. That was a political decision, but I can tell you that the acid rain problem has not been solved.
I want to thank you for talking with us today because your research has really had an impact, at least on policy and some of the way that we live our lives in North America today. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you.